welcome to our Allied Command show tonight with our famous Ken R. Johnston Sr., one of the speakers at many of the UFO conference events. We're real proud to have him as a regular co-host on Friday nights, and we've invited Janet Lessin from Maui, Hawaii, and a friend of hers to come on. But we'd like to talk to you tonight about being mysterious and being mysterious allies. We would like to enjoy getting to know other people that are interested, like we are, as UFO enthusiasts. So we've created the Allied Command for the various levels of existence in space. We have the Allied Command Spacecraft, and we'll be talking about extraterrestrials and what we do to work with consciousness and all the levels that we may exist at that some of us just don't talk about much. Now, we're metaphysicians, for those of you that are in the Universal Life Ministries, so we welcome all of you and all the fun things that are supernatural, mysterious, metaphysical, many of the dimensions that we use in space, the various levels of being humanoids in these containers. And we talk about we're born, we live, and we die, and everything's a gift in between. And so some of us think we're souls, some of us don't. Some of us are naturalists and think we're atheists and believe only in one way in the things that we can physically see and prove peer-to-peer reviews. And I've got a few of those in various groups. And Ken and I are sharing UFO Secret Space Command together in a Facebook project of social media. So we welcome everybody to join us on our UFO Secret Space group. And we're going to talk tonight with whoever wants to show up and share what Ken and I are building together in the Allied Command in 2019. My husband started with me years ago in TJMRCT Radio with the Ascension Center Organization, Ace Folk Life Society, and we have the Allied Command and then the Supreme Allied Command, and we'll talk about the military side versus civilian like we did last night with some of our MUFON people that showed up. And so we're hopefully going to build a good radio show that people can tune in and listen to UFO stories, extraterrestrial stories, and the Allied Command and the many multidimensional beings that we may or may not be. So it's all up to the individual listener, and we all have an opinion, don't we? So without further ado, I'm going to get Ken on here. Ken Johnston Sr., can you hear me now?
Oh, I hear you loud and clear, TJ. It's a real pleasure to be on your program.
Thank you, Ken, from Albuquerque area, and Boaz. Is that, how do you say the name for you have your little ponies? Because there's a history with that too.
Yes, it certainly is. The little town called Belen, Belen, and it got that name from about 5 German families that came over before World War I started, and they colonized actually that part of this part of New Mexico, and it has grown since then. It's primarily a farming community, and it hasn't grown much bigger than that, a little over 5,000 people. So it's a little country town, and then I'm outside of town in the country, and my wife was a horsey person. She loved her horses, so when I married her, I had to love horses. And we got down here, and I was going into town. I'll get real fast to give you a little quick drop on this. And I heard a radio, and they were talking about these miniature horses. And I stopped by this people's house and looked at those little things, and I thought they were so cool. And I got my wife into them. Well, you know, if you love horses, it doesn't make any difference how big or how small they are. So since 1999, 98, 99, we've been raising miniature horses, and she's gone so far as going up to the national championships. And we've got, I guess we got about 14 little miniature horses right now. And they pull carts, they do work. There's a whole history. I'll go into it some other time. But it's fascinating how you wind up going from being a flight instructor on 737s with the Boeing company down to raising little miniature horses. And I wouldn't change it for anything in the world.
Well, I'm glad that you and friend do that, and I know there is a history in the coal mines, and they brought them to America, and we've discussed that on one of the shows. But let's talk about you a little bit, because I saw you on the Sci-Fi Channel the other night, and I wasn't looking for you. But apparently with YouTube, when you leave it on and you fall asleep, it'll recommend and it'll keep playing things. And all of a sudden, a voice woke me up, and it was yours. And I looked up and went, is that Ken Johnston? And you're in a black captain's jacket, or the kind I used to actually get to wear once in a while with a lamb wool type of collar or something, but it had all your patches on it. And I don't know if it has that collar or not, or if I imagined it, but tell me about how you wound up on Sci-Fi Channel. That's a very interesting story. Now, folks, this is Ken. He's got over 3,000 hours in space suits, I guess you'd say, pressurized suits, and training with some astronauts back in the Apollo mission days. And you may know of him from UFO conferences, but I met him in 2017, and we've gotten along. We were talking about a person that we sort of got involved with in this UFO business, but we'll get into our mysterious lives. But tell me a little bit about how you got on the Sci-Fi Channel in that area of the country and all of that.
Actually, you're going to have to go all the way back to, let's see, when I retired from the Boeing company in 1997 and 1998. 97 it was. Mr. Richard C. Hoagland, which many people are aware of him, the man, the Face on Mars story. And I used to listen to him on the radio, and in between at nights when I didn't have students to teach them on the 737s, there was a group of us with the Boeing company, and we had a little nickname. We called ourselves the Majestic 12 because there were 12 of us. And, of course, we weren't connected with the real European and worldwide Majestic 12 group, but it was kind of cool. At any rate, he was going to be, I was off that night, didn't have a student, and one of my cohorts at Boeing gave me a call and said, hey, Mr. Hoagland's in town tonight. He's down at the conference center putting on a program. And I said, shoot, I'll go down. They all said, well, be sure you get us some information. So I'd say, well, I'll write up a little note introducing myself to Mr. Hoagland, because he'd been asking if there were anybody that had documents or records or proof of what we really did on the moon, et cetera, et cetera. And so I wrote a little letter of introduction and went over to the conference area, and I walked in, and the ladies are there taking our money, and so I'm signing up, and I said, oh, by the way, I want to give this letter to Mr. Hoagland because he's looking, wanted to see if there were any of us around like that. And she was reading it, and her hands start to shake, and she says, you're who we've been looking for. And I went, oh, I'm in trouble now. And she went in the back, and the next thing I know, Mr. Hoagland's up front, and he's reading the letter and talking to me, and I told him a couple of quick answers. Yes, I'm the guy that kept a whole archive of pictures and film and documents and records and everything else when I retired from NASA down there. I wasn't a NASA employee. I was a Brown and Northrop. Well, it goes all the way back to when I was with Grumman, and I was one of the civilian astronauts, and we tested it in the vacuum chambers, and then I helped train the astronauts how to fly the lunar module, and so that brought it up. And then they laid 30,000 of us off at once we landed Apollo 11 on the moon, and then I went over to the BRN's Lunar and Planetary Science Department, with the Lunar Receiving Laboratory, and became the director of the Data and Photo Control Department. And that's where I had access to all the original negatives and the original film and everything else that came back on each mission over at the main photo lab. So each time I had to order something, I would order an extra copy and put in Ken's archive, so to speak. That I had to maintain 5 sets of all the pictures and things in my. And I had 3 employees that worked under me, and we kept them in our filing cabinets. And then when they had the big layoff, my director came by and he says, "Okay, you need to get rid of everything except for 1 set." And I said, "I complained." He said, "Just dump them." I said, "Well, wait a minute. It's been paid for by our tax dollars. We ought to give them to universities." And he argued with me back and forth. And finally, he said the golden words. He says, "I don't care what you do. Just get rid of all but 1 set." So I sent 2 sets of materials to the universities, 2 universities, and I kept 1 set there in my office there, the Data and Photo Control Department, and then another set I put in a duffel bag, and that night when I went home, I just threw it in the back of my car, and I kept it as an archive to keep it. Well, it was nearly 20 years later when I ran into Mr. Hoagland and then told them about what I had. So the next morning they came over to my house, and he and 2 other people were in, and they started looking at the pictures, and their jaw dropped, and they're saying, "Oh my God, these things are so pure, and there's no tampering that's been done with them, and you can see some of the bases and things that were on the moon." And I hadn't really paid any attention, looked at it. They'd been locked up in a big safe that I had bought to keep my records and things in. And in fact, that my wife took one look. She said, "Oh my God, what's this reflection in the visor of the astronaut there on the moon?" And it was a craft up above them, behind the astronaut that was taking the pictures. This was on Apollo 12. Anyway, so I may have gotten a little off track here, but TJ, you're asking how I wound up here, and that is after I then retired from Boeing, and we moved here to the Albuquerque area, and got with actually just stayed out of trouble, wound up raising little miniature horses with my wife, and then started writing books. And the first book I wrote was Ken's Moon, and it's an autobiography, and it goes into all of the record documents and records and where I file things. I got attacked verbally as well as almost physically on the coming out forward whenever I went to Washington, D.C. with Hoagland and gave presentations to the national press and everything else about the documents and records and things that exist, the fact that we actually discovered alien bases on the moon that had been kept secret all these years. And so I was just trying to keep my out of trouble, but then I had this guy by the name of, that I knew him, I worked with him, and we sort of thought I was good friends. It was James Oberg, was him, and he went after me. I was in India giving a presentation to the people up there and the things going on, and I thought everything was just fine. And in the middle of the night, I get a knock on the door up in the mountains where we were in India, in the northern area, and this my escort came, and he was just sweating all. He says, "I don't know what to do." He says, "Well, but the director of science for Assam, India, called him, and someone had called him and told him that I was lying, that I wasn't who I said I was. I was just there to take money away from him." I started laughing. I said, "Well, let me guess. That would have to be Richard Hoagland." And the guy's mouth dropped. He says, "Well, you know who that is?" I said, "Absolutely." He goes after me. I said, "Here, I've got books. I can show you the documents and prove that I am who I am." Well, it made him feel better. He says, "Well, okay, we'll get this worked out." So he said, "Let's get things ready." This was like 3 o'clock in the morning. So I had to pack up at this resort where we were up in the mountains. And
was it Oberg that had called in on you? It was Oberg, right?
Oh, you betcha it was. Yeah,
not Richard
James
Hoagland,
Oberg.
but Richard was...
No.
Oh, James Oberg,
Hoagland?
okay. I think you said Richard Hoagland, but you can go back and listen to it on YouTube. Excuse me. Well, but I want you to know that Janet's here. I'm going to let her talk to you about being on the Sci-Fi Channel, too. But go ahead with that part of the story. Okay, they called you back in India. Yeah, keep going.
Anyway, so they were taking me down off the mountain. We came to an intersection out in the country. It was dirt road, and the guy that was had talked to me at 3 o'clock in the morning, he gets out of the car, and this lady gets in, and she is the vice president of the science department for Assam, India. She gets in, and we go over takes me over to the airport. I thought they were going to take me to their offices, and we were going to clear everything up. Instead, they took me to the airport. The chief of security at the airport put me in a holding room, and they bought a ticket and had me fly out of the northern India down south, and then get a ticket to had to pay for it myself and fly back to the United States. Well, for 36 hours, my wife had no idea where I was. She just knew that things had gone kind of awry, and I was told, leave, do not come back. They didn't do their research, and now I have on my wall a letter of apology that they hadn't checked everything else and found out that Mr.
Oberg.
See, I almost said Oberg. Yeah, that Oberg is the one that had called them and that they hadn't checked in and that they apologized. That they'd love to have me come back. And my wife doesn't think it'd be a good thing for me to go back up over there again. But those kind of things have been happening, and since then, Mr. Oberg was told, back off, leave Mr. Johnston alone, because every time you go after him, he presents documents and proves that you're wrong. And so hopefully, on this, I will say, Richard Hoagland was correct to get me into the National Press Club and make it public, and then have the documents and records already published. We made high-resolution copies of every picture I have, every film, copies, you name it, I did. And I donated a set to the Roswell Museum.